All right, good morning. I'm recording this in the morning, so good morning. Happy Friday. This is week 26, COVID reflections. I'm not going to talk too much about COVID today, but I'm actually going to talk about the upcoming election in North Carolina. For those following and listening and living in North Carolina, this will be more tailored to you, to our audience and friends and followers outside North Carolina. Hopefully it's still helpful. But obviously November 3rd is a big election day for a number of local and national offices, including the presidency, but also state superintendent of public instruction, which is essentially the position or the person that runs all public schools in North Carolina. And so that vote is on the ballot coming up November 3rd. So number one, that's important. And number two, I want to talk about kind of the candidates today. So there's Jen Mangrum, if I'm saying that last name right, is a Democrat, and then Catherine Truitt, who is the Republican, and really boils down to two differences that they have, I would say, philosophically. They agree that kids need good schools, that teacher pay should increase and that sort of stuff, but the two discrepancies are around school funding and school choice. And so I want to provide some insights of what I'm reading, what our team is discussing about supporting, but also the implications of that in public education across the state of North Carolina. So let's do school funding first. So the interesting thing here is that Mangrum, the Democrat, is arguing, and I think rightfully so, that schools in North Carolina are underfunded. You can see that through a number of examples if you're following anything in the state, but probably the biggest example is through the Leandro case, which we've talked a little bit about before, but has essentially said that North Carolina is not providing an equitable or sound education for all of its constituents in public schools, and often citing that there's schools are underfunded, teachers are underpaid, there's not literally enough money in the system to provide high quality public education for families and students in North Carolina. So, and that was a lawsuit that came 20, 30 years ago. Still no response in terms of like more money or anything yet. And that's tied up in the General Assembly. But nonetheless, that in addition to a number of kind of cuts across the state, particularly now given COVID, schools are underfunded. And so we think Mangrum is correct in that. Truitt interestingly says that that schools have increased, or funding for schools across the state have increased by 20% year over year. We did some research. We couldn't find that. Not really sure where she's getting that number. Do recognize that school funding can get a little strange and a little weird, not very easy to compare apples to apples. A lot of strange formulas out there. So siding with Mangrum there, and I think hopefully most people that schools need more support and they need more funds. Secondly, school choice, which we talk about a lot. Interestingly here enough, and this differs based upon state by state in terms of Democrats and Republicans, but the Democrat, Mangrum, is not really about school choice, doesn't really love the idea of charters, says kind of the prototypical stuff that they siphon funds from school districts or traditional schools and whatnot, and is advocating for more magnet school programs and options that way. Truitt, the Republican, again, is for school choice, appears to be favorable of charters, wants a bit more, I would say, control over charters and perhaps less autonomy, and just be careful about where they're opening and who they're serving, but generally for school choice and for charters. So interesting thing here is from the Democratic side, and Mangrum from our point of view, a few things is that charters don't, the word siphoning is a poor choice of words, I would say, and is probably used too much. Frankly, when we're talking about kids and families, money follows the students and their families in most states in public education. And so if a family is aspiring and selecting to choose another school, the money goes with that student or that family to that particular school. So saying that you are siphoning from a district appears to be a political word that perhaps we shouldn't use when families are exerting school choice and their right to choose the best education possible for their students. Coincidentally enough, Mangrum, the Democrat, did not speak to private schools. And so she's casting a lot of blame around siphoning, quote unquote, or money being removed from traditional districts, but does not talk about the effect of private schools on public school choice or public school funds. And so we think she should consider that and speak to kind of both sides of that. She talks more about magnet schools, or magnet options in schools, or just magnet schools in general, which are good. I think to clarify though, magnet schools are often just as segregated as neighborhood schools in that way as well, primarily because there's pretty high stakes testing to get into those magnet options. And if anybody has tried, one, the tests aren't always easy for students, and we could argue not always equitable for all students. And also more specifically that with those testing requirements, it can be tough to get in. And when it's tough to get in, it's not always equitable and often very segregated in that way as well. So just expanding magnets would not necessarily have the same effect on increasing, or I would say decreasing segregation by race or by income in schools. And so we would certainly encourage you all to think about that. And just to go back, Truitt, the Republican, is for charters, believes in school choice, and I think is thinking semi-fairly around any type of restrictions to make sure that if charters aren't doing well, they close, and that they are still working to support students and communities that they are serving. Other thing that a little bit favorable around Truitt is that she is advocating for charters and districts to work together, which I think you guys know we appreciate sharing best practices, collaborating with each other. The faster we can all in any state work together to improve all schools, charters, and districts, the faster we can all get to a day where we have high quality options and high quality schools for everybody. So interesting, again, to recap, November 3rd in North Carolina, State Superintendent of Public Instruction will be on the ballot. Jen Mangrum, the Democrat, for increasing funding, but not for school choice in schools, for schools and for families. Catherine Truitt, the Republican, is not apparently looking to increase funding for schools, but is for school choice for all families. So some interesting decisions. Hopefully that context helps. Ed and C, if you guys follow them, have been pushing out good articles and good information about these candidates, as well as the News and Observer has a voter guide, which I found this morning, which was actually really helpful. So we'll link those in the notes if you're following this on social media, or the show notes on the podcast. Hope that helps. Hit us up with more questions, but appreciate those who have reached out to ask our insights so far about these two candidates. Have a good weekend.